The morning of December 16, 1944 began like countless others in the frozen landscape of Mona, Germany, with the familiar thunder of American artillery echoing across the battlefield. Yet something extraordinary was about to unfold that would fundamentally alter the nature of warfare itself. As German soldiers of the 326th Volksgrenadier Division advanced against the 38th Cavalry Squadron's positions, they encountered a phenomenon that defied everything they understood about combat. The shells weren't behaving as they should. Instead of striking the ground or embedding themselves in trees, they were exploding in midair with terrifying precision, creating deadly cascades of steel fragments that rendered traditional defensive positions useless. These veteran soldiers, who had survived the brutal campaigns of the Eastern Front, found themselves facing something that challenged their very comprehension of battlefield tactics. At the heart of this transformation stood Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406 Artillery Group, who had just made one of the most consequential unauthorized decisions in military history. Against explicit orders and without permission from higher command, he had directed his gunners to load shells equipped with proximity fuses, devices containing miniature radar systems that could detect their distance from targets and detonate at optimal heights. This technology would multiply artillery effectiveness by a staggering factor of 50, rewriting the fundamental mathematics of warfare in the snow-covered forests of the Ardennes. The German offensive, known as Operation Watch on the Rhine, had begun with tremendous promise for the Wehrmacht. Hitler's desperate final gamble involved 200,000 soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces, all assembled in secret through the fog-shrouded Ardennes. The Führer had assured his generals that this massive assault would split the Allied armies and recapture Antwerp, potentially turning the tide of a war that was slipping inexorably toward defeat. The initial bombardment at 0530 hours on December 16th achieved complete tactical surprise. German artillery unleashed a devastating barrage at a rate of 1,600 rounds per minute along an 85-mile front. American intelligence had failed catastrophically, missing the massive build-up entirely. Many frontline units consisted of either inexperienced replacements or exhausted veterans who had been sent to this supposedly quiet sector for rest and recovery. Faced with this overwhelming assault at Monschau, Colonel Axelson confronted an impossible tactical situation. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small reconnaissance unit, was being systematically overwhelmed by superior German forces. Conventional artillery couldn't stem the tide of the assault. In a moment of desperate calculation, Axelson made his historic decision to deploy the secret proximity, fused shells without authorization, a choice that would later expose him to potential court-martial proceedings. The effect proved immediate and devastating. German soldiers advancing in traditional assault formations suddenly found themselves under a type of fire they had never experienced. The shells exploded 30 to 50 feet above them, each detonation creating a cone of fragments that covered vastly more area than conventional ground-burst shells. Veterans who had mastered the art of taking cover from normal artillery were cut down in their foxholes, behind trees, and in ditches, anywhere they had sought shelter from the lethal rain above. The proximity fuse represented the convergence of American scientific innovation and industrial capacity at their absolute peak. Unlike conventional shells that required direct impact or time fuses that often detonated at incorrect heights, the proximity fuse contained a self-contained radar system no larger than a coffee can. Inside each fuse, American engineers had packed 130 electronic components, including 4 or 5 miniature vacuum tubes, that could withstand the incredible 20,000 times gravity force of being fired from an artillery piece. The physics involved were staggering in their complexity. At the moment of firing, the acceleration would crush a glass ampule containing electrolyte, creating a battery that powered the tiny radar system for the shell's flight duration. Dr. Meltuve at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory had driven this development of Manhattan Project, Level Intensity. The laboratory, disguised as an abandoned, used car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland, employed 3% of all American physicists at peak production. Security measures matched those of the atomic bomb program. Workers couldn't discuss their work, even with family members, and each fuse carried a unique serial number for tracking purposes. The technical challenge had seemed insurmountable. Vacuum tubes designed for living room radios had to be completely redesigned to survive being fired from cannons while functioning at extreme rotational speeds and working in all weather conditions. The breakthrough came through miniaturization techniques that would later revolutionize the electronics industry. DUPRA. James Van Allen's tubes were no larger than pencil erasers, yet contained all the elements of conventional radio tubes. By December 1944, American factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses daily, with over 100 companies contributing to the effort, from RCA and General Electric to Sylvania and Crossley Corporation. The program's cost reached $1 billion in 1940s dollars, second only to the Manhattan Project in wartime spending. Axelson's unauthorized use on December 16th created an immediate command crisis. He had violated direct orders restricting proximity fuses to anti-aircraft use, with commanders fearing that captured examples might be reverse-engineered by the Germans. However, the devastating effectiveness at Montchaux was undeniable. The German attack had been stopped cold with casualties that shocked both sides. Word of the weapon's impact reached Supreme Headquarters rapidly. General Eisenhower, recognizing the desperate situation developing across the Ardennes, formally requested authorization on December 19th. By December 21st, all restrictions were lifted, and proximity fuses were released for general ground combat use across the entire Bulge battlefield. The rapid distribution that followed demonstrated American logistical superiority. Within days, proximity fused shells were being delivered to artillery units throughout the Ardennes. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion at Bastogne received their allocation just as the German ring closed around the town. The 420th Armoured Field Artillery Battalion, with their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, began using them to defend the northwest approaches. The 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert B. Barnes, employed them with devastating effect southwest of Bastogne. Each unit discovered the same fundamental truth. Proximity fuses transformed artillery from a support weapon into a decisive battlefield tool. Forward observers no longer needed to carefully adjust fire. The fuses would find their own optimal detonation point. Accuracy requirements decreased while lethality increased exponentially. The siege of Bastogne provided the perfect demonstration of proximity fuses in defensive warfare. The 101st Airborne Division, completely surrounded and outnumbered, held the vital crossroads against repeated German assaults. Their artillery support included the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 75-minded pack howitzers capable of firing proximity-fused shells. Between December 19th and 31st, all 63rd fired exactly 676 rounds according to official unit records. While not all were proximity fused due to limited supply, those that were had devastating psychological and physical effects. German assault formations simply melted away under the airburst barrages, with entire platoons eliminated in seconds. The December 22nd attack, following General McAuliffe's famous "Nuts" reply to the German surrender demand, showcased the weapon's effectiveness. German infantry advancing across snow-covered fields in traditional formations were caught in the open as proximity fused shells detonated overhead with precise timing, creating overlapping patterns of destruction that left no safe zones. Perhaps the most thoroughly documented demonstration of proximity fuse lethality occurred at the Sauer River near Echternach on December 25-26. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was driving north to relieve Bastogne, personally witnessed this engagement and recorded it in his memoir, War as I Knew It. A German battalion attempting to cross the partially frozen river believed they were hidden by darkness and fog from American observers. Traditional artillery would have required careful adjustment of fire, giving the Germans time to complete their crossing or seek cover. But proximity-fused shells needed no such adjustment. Patton wrote, "Whip caught a German battalion crossing the Sewer. The new Posetti ammunition was devastating. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run. The river behind them, our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies. This figure represents one of the few precisely documented casualty figures from proximity fuse employment, demonstrating the mathematical efficiency of the weapon. A single battalion essentially ceased to exist in minutes. The Ardennes dense forests, which Germans had counted on for concealment, became death traps when proximity fuses entered the equation. In open terrain, a proximity fuse detonating at 30 to 50 feet was deadly enough, but in forests the effects multiplied exponentially. The air bursts shattered tree branches, creating thousands of additional wooden projectiles that traveled at hundreds of feet per second with lethal effect. The proximity fuse operated on principles that seemed like science fiction to 1940s soldiers. Each fuse contained a tiny radio transmitter operating at 180 to 220 Mets, continuously sending out waves that reflected off objects: ground, trees, vehicles, human bodies. As the shell approached its target, the reflected signal strengthened, and when it reached predetermined intensity corresponding to optimal burst height, an electronic switch triggered detonation. The entire system had to function under conditions that would destroy normal electronics. During firing, acceleration reached 20,000 times Earth's gravity, enough to crush a human body to microscopic thickness. The shells spun at rates that created massive centrifugal forces, while temperatures ranged from gun barrel heat of the so-1000 F to sub-zero conditions at trajectory peak. Yet the delicate vacuum tubes, protected by innovative cushioning systems, survived and functioned with over 80% reliability. The German intelligence failure regarding proximity fuses proved catastrophic. In December 1944, Wehrmacht forces overran an American ammunition depot, capturing approximately 20,000 proximity fused shells. This intelligence windfall should have led to immediate countermeasure development. Instead, German technical experts examined the captured fuses and declared them impossible. The presence of vacuum tubes in an artillery shell contradicted everything German engineers believed about electronics and ballistics. This failure stemmed partly from institutional blindness. Germany had actually led proximity fuse development before the war, with Rheinmetall Borsig and AIG Berlin having working prototypes by 1940. However, Hitler's order cancelling all weapons projects requiring more than 6 months to production had terminated the program. German engineers couldn't believe the Americans had solved problems they themselves had abandoned. The production miracle behind proximity fuses matched any wartime industrial achievement. By December 1944, over 100 American companies had converted to fuse production. The Crossley Corporation abandoned refrigerator manufacturing for fuse assembly, while Emerson Radio retooled from home electronics to weapons production. Quality control exceeded anything previously attempted in mass production, with each of the 130 components undergoing individual testing and every solder joint inspected under magnification. The workforce, predominantly women, maintained this precision while working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. They couldn't know what they were making due to security compartmentalization. They only knew it was vital to the war effort. By December 1944, they were producing one proximity fuse every 2 seconds around the clock. The cost reduction achieved was remarkable in 1942. Each fuse cost $732, more than a worker's annual salary. By December 1944, mass production had driven costs to $18 per unit while maintaining quality. General Patton understood proximity fuses value better than perhaps any commander. His Third Army, driving to relieve Bastogne, used them as a breakthrough weapon. His artillery commander, Brigadier General Edward Williams, developed new tactics specifically for proximity fuse employment, pioneering the time on target concentration using proximity fuses, multiple battalions firing simultaneously so shells arrived together. When dozens of proximity fused shells detonated simultaneously at optimal height, the effect was apocalyptic. The Battle of Elsenborn Ridge demonstrated proximity fuses at maximum effectiveness. Here, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions held critical terrain against the 6th SS Panzer Army, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. Over 3 days, December 17th, 19th, American artillery fired 160,000 rounds, with approximately 40,000 being proximity fused. These 25% of shells accounted for an estimated 60% of the 5,000-plus German casualties. By early January 1945, maintaining secrecy became impossible. Too many shells had been fired, and too many soldiers had witnessed their effects. On January 6th, the War Department authorized limited disclosure. The New York Times reported on a new type of artillery shell that multiplies the effectiveness of American guns. Without explaining the technology, post-war analysis revealed proximity fuse's decisive impact. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt stated, "The proximity fuse was decisive. Our attacks broke down not because of American courage, though they fought well, but because of artillery that seemed to have eyes." The statistics tell the story. 200,000 proximity fused shells fired, accounting for an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 German casualties, up to 20% of total German losses during the battle. The Battle of the Bulge ended January 25, 1945, with German forces in full retreat. Hitler's last offensive had cost Germany approximately 100,000 casualties while achieving nothing. American losses totaled 75,000, including 19,000 killed. The proximity fuse had proven itself not just as a weapon, but as a war winner. The proximity fuse program generated advances that transformed post-war technology. The miniaturized vacuum tubes became foundations for modern electronics, while quality control procedures established for fuse production became industry standards. The organizational methods coordinating hundreds of suppliers pioneered modern supply chain management. Every precision-guided munition today descends from the proximity fuse, the first weapon that could sense its environment and choose when to detonate. From Colonel Axelson's unauthorized first use on December 16, 1944, through the systematic deployment of 200,000 shells across the Ardennes, proximity fuses demonstrated that scientific innovation could provide decisive military advantage. The convergence of American industrial capacity, scientific genius, and tactical adaptation created a weapon that helped determine the war's outcome. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the age of technological warfare truly arrived, forever changing how humans wage war.